Hello, I'm Mercedes Stevenson, and this is the West Block, politics, perspectives, and players. Climate change and the environment are set to be front and center in the upcoming federal election campaign. Extreme weather is being felt from coast to coast to coast, damaging floods in the east, devastating forest fires in the west, and searing heat waves in central Canada, leaving homes and lives destroyed. Many climate scientists are drawing a link between extreme weather and climate change. Last year, insured damage from severe weather events reached $1.9 billion, according to the Insurance Bureau of Canada. For the first time ever, the Bank of Canada flagged climate change as a vulnerability for the national economy. But could Canada benefit from a warming climate?
The point is, it isn't the dire catastrophe that you keep hearing about. Canada would, in fact, be a beneficiary. Just in terms of the arable land issue, the three prairie provinces have double the territory of France, and the Government of Canada, the Agriculture Department, estimated an increase of between 26 and 40% of arable land potentially by 2040, and that's really significant and none too soon, because the UN said that the world is going to need 50% more food by 2050. So this is a very serious contribution that Canada can make. We'll benefit, but the entire world will benefit as well.
According to NASA, 97% of climate scientists believe humans are causing global warming and climate change. Glaciers are melting into the sea, sea levels are rising, and many nations are spending millions of dollars to reinforce coastlines and relocate residents affected by rising water. So what are the costs of climate change? Joining me now from Vancouver is Kai Chan. He is a professor at the Institute for Resources, Environment and Sustainability at the University of British Columbia. Thanks for joining us, Kai.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Now, we just heard from Joe Oliver, former federal finance minister. He argues that there's a lot of benefits that Canada could see as a result of climate change. He's not arguing over whether or not it could happen. He's saying, look, it's not all bad if it is happening. How do you respond to those arguments? Do you believe that climate change would be a good thing for Canada?
There are going to be some benefits for Canada for sure, but the way that Joe Oliver has presented it is really misleading. And so, one of the arguments is that the economy is going to be a net neutral unless climate change goes to a really high level. Now, that's really misleading because that's measured through GDP, and GDP as a measure of economic output rises when we have extreme events that cause catastrophic damage that we then have to repair, right? So those construction activities actually contribute a lot to the economy. The way that the GDP measures it, right, it doesn't properly characterize the losses that we experience as individuals and as communities.
Now, he cites that Moody's report as having more arable land that could be farmed, more areas that could be drilled. What are some of the specific costs that Canada would incur if climate change continues at the same rate?
Yeah, so for every benefit, there is a similar kind of cost, right? And so it's true that there is more arable land, but as precipitation patterns change, we're going to see less precipitation in some of those important growing areas, much longer droughts, more risk of forest fires, greater risk of floods, and then in particular up north in northern communities, we're going to see a melting of permafrost that is going to cause a ton of damage to the infrastructure there, because that infrastructure is based on the permafrost. As the permafrost melts, so that's basically frozen ground underneath, then the buildings really buckle. Buildings and bridges and roads buckle and just kind of sink into the ground. So there are going to be lots of costs that are associated with climate change, and there are going to be a few benefits. One major question is whether those who are bearing the costs are really being compensated for that. And I don't expect that the benefits are actually going to outweigh the costs when you take a whole perspective to it.
Some say, look, the science is clear, there is consensus, there is climate change happening, and it is as a result of human activity. Others say, no, if you look at it, it's not as clear as people think. Look, we just had a cold summer. It can't always be warming if I'm experiencing something that tells me differently. What does the science say about where we're at in terms of climate change and what's causing it?
So the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is really clear, and this is the most authoritative body on climate change. They say it's virtually certain that climate change is happening and that it's due to human causes. So there's really no more room for doubt about that. Absolutely, there are natural causes that also contribute to climate change, but they seem to be smaller contributors than human-caused ones, including the rise in greenhouse gases. Global climate change, although it's going to warm the planet on average, is going to have regionally variable results. So when we look at the average global temperatures, it is clear that those are rising, but that manifests in weird weather, right? And so some scientists are calling it global weirding, in order to account for that fact that in some places we are going to see some cooling, actually, at least during some seasons, but we're also going to see a lot of other strange things like increased floods and fires, etc.
And speaking of those floods and fires, one of the things we talked to Mr. Oliver about was the link between climate change and extreme weather events, which can be very expensive for governments, for individuals, for insurance agencies. And he was saying that that IPCC report doesn't clearly make the link between climate change and extreme weather events. What do we know about the science that suggests whether or not there is a link, and how much do we really know about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's really clear from my read of the IPCC that they established that there is a very clear link between forest fires, between floods, and other kinds of extreme events, especially droughts, of course. He might be thinking more of tornadoes and hurricanes. There, it is less clear whether climate change is contributing to an increased incidence, so an increased number of those extreme events, but it's pretty clear that it is contributing to a greater magnitude of those extreme events. So going back though to the ones where it's more clear, more flooding for sure. When you've got a warmer atmosphere, that warmer atmosphere can hold more water and it releases it in more extreme events, right? More stronger rainfall. It's not the only cause in terms of contributing to flooding. We also have land use patterns and the clearing of wetlands, too much concrete basically in cities. Fires also very clearly contributed to climate change through the increase in droughts, which dries out the fuel load and then also makes the temperatures in many cases warmer. So you've got a long dry summer, sets up basically a tinderbox in some forests. So those connections are made very clearly in the IPCC report. I'm not sure what Joe Oliver is talking about when he refutes that.
Kai, there are those who say, look, people are being alarmist. What do you think the consequences are if we continue at the current rate, both in terms of climate change and in terms of the level of action that the Canadian government is taking for Canadians living right here at home?
So there's two ways of seeing this. I mean, one is to recognize that our most important role in terms of contributing to this problem and receiving impacts from global climate change is basically our perception on the world stage and how that is reflected in foreign policy as we receive it as well as export it. Canadians have this reputation. When you go abroad, for the most part, people think of Canada as a sane place, as a good contributor to the world. That reputation has already been eroded somewhat due to our policy on climate change. The fact that for many years in international climate negotiations, Canada won the Fossil of the Year award, meaning that it had the most outdated policies, the most regressive, and the most dangerous in terms of contributing to an undermining of the world order. Right? So already we're seeing Canada's kind of role as a responsible agent in the world being eroded. We've already seen a lot of dangerous fires like the one in Fort Murray from a few years ago, and floods, including in Calgary, in Toronto, and elsewhere, in Ottawa over this last year. So these kinds of events are surely going to continue. They're going to become more and more normal as climate change picks up pace, which it will do just because of the inertia in the system. So it's time to get serious about turning that around and slowing climate change down.
Kai, thank you so much for joining us. That's all the time we have for today, but please be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or head over to our website at thewestblock.ca. I'm Mercedes Stevenson for The West Block.